The champagne flute slipped from my trembling fingers, shattering against the marble floor of our Connecticut estate. 22 years of believing I knew who my parents were died in that moment, along with the crystal that had held my celebratory toast just seconds before. The manila envelope in my father's outstretched hand might as well have contained my execution papers, because the life I thought I was building was about to end. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sign these, Riley, or consider yourself no longer our daughter. Those words still echo in my mind 6 months later as I sit in my Austin apartment, finally ready to tell you what really happened after I walked across that graduation stage. What my parents thought would destroy me actually became the catalyst for the most incredible transformation of my life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it all began, 3 months before my college graduation from Northwestern State University in Portland, Oregon. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of our family's Millbrook estate as I sat across from my parents at the breakfast table, laptop open, showing them my final semester schedule. Everything felt perfect in my world. After 4 years of architectural studies, I was finally about to graduate summa cum laude, ready to join the family firm that bore our name. Chen and Associates had been my father's pride and joy for over 20 years, and I'd grown up dreaming of the day I'd add my own vision to its legacy. My father, David Chen, had always been my hero. A first-generation immigrant who built his architecture firm from nothing into one of Connecticut's most prestigious design companies, he embodied everything I wanted to become. Methodical, brilliant, and seemingly devoted to our family, he'd spent countless evenings teaching me to read blueprints and understand the poetry hidden in structural engineering. My mother, Patricia, had been his perfect complement, managing the firm's business operations with an efficiency that made their partnership appear seamless. So the internship with Morrison and Associates in Portland is going well? My mother asked, stirring her coffee with the same precise movements she used for everything in her life. Beyond well, I replied, unable to contain my excitement. Professor Rodriguez thinks they might offer me a position after graduation. Can you imagine? Working with the team that designed the Pearl District renovation project would be an incredible experience before I come home to join you. My father looked up from his tablet where he'd been reviewing project proposals. About that, Riley. We need to discuss your future plans. Something in his tone made me pause. There was a formality there I hadn't heard before, a distance that felt unusual. What do you mean? I thought we'd already decided. I graduate in May, maybe work in Portland for a year to gain some outside experience, then come back to Connecticut and start learning the family business from the ground up. Plans change, my mother said, her voice carrying an odd edge. Your father and I have been reconsidering what's best for the company's future. The conversation felt surreal. For as long as I could remember, joining Chen and Associates had been treated as my destiny. They'd encouraged my architectural studies, celebrated my academic achievements, and spoke regularly about the innovative directions I might take the firm. My brother Marcus had chosen medicine instead, becoming a successful surgeon in Boston, which had only reinforced their focus on me as the heir apparent to the family business. I don't understand, I said, closing my laptop to give them my full attention. Is this about my grades? Because I'm maintaining a 3.9 GPA, and Professor Rodriguez says my senior thesis project is some of the best work she's seen. It's not about your academic performance, my father replied, though he wouldn't meet my eyes. It's about what's realistic for someone in your position. My position? The phrase hung in the air like a challenge I didn't understand. Dad, what are you talking about? What position? My mother set down her coffee cup with a sharp clink against the saucer. Riley, you're 22 years old. You should be thinking about settling down, finding a suitable husband, starting a family. The architecture world is demanding, competitive. It's not really a path for someone who should be focusing on other priorities. The words hit me like a physical blow. In all my years of planning, dreaming, and preparing, my parents had never once suggested that my gender should limit my aspirations. If anything, they'd seemed proud of my ambitions, often mentioning to their friends how their daughter was following in her father's footsteps. Other priorities. I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. Since when have you ever suggested I should prioritize marriage over career? You've been encouraging my architectural studies for 4 years. We've been supportive of your education, my father corrected, finally looking at me directly. Education is always valuable, but there's a difference between learning and building a career that will consume your life. The rational part of my mind recognized that something fundamental had shifted, but I couldn't pinpoint what or why. These were the same people who had driven me to architecture summer camps, who had celebrated when I got accepted to Northwestern's competitive program, who had framed my Dean's List certificates and displayed them proudly in the family room. "Is this about Marcus?" I asked, grasping for any explanation that made sense. "Because he chose medicine instead of joining the firm. Are you worried about the business continuing?" "Your brother's choices are his own," my mother said. "This conversation is about what's appropriate for you." Appropriate, the word felt foreign, coming from a woman who had built her own successful career managing complex business operations. Patricia Chen had never been a traditional housewife, and she'd raised me to believe that my dreams were just as valid as any man's. "Mom, you've worked your entire adult life. You built the business side of Dad's firm into what it is today. How can you sit there and tell me that career success isn't appropriate for women?" Her expression hardened in a way I'd never seen before. My circumstances were different. I worked because it was necessary for our family's survival when we were starting out. Now, thankfully, that's no longer the case. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, growing more strained with each exchange. My parents had clearly coordinated their position, presenting what felt like a unified front against aspirations they had previously nurtured. By the time I excused myself to head back to Portland for my final semester, I was confused, hurt, and completely bewildered by their sudden transformation. Over the following weeks, I threw myself into my studies and internship, hoping that distance might provide clarity. Professor Helen Rodriguez, my thesis advisor, noticed my distraction during one of our weekly meetings. "Riley, your work is still excellent, but you seem troubled lately. Is everything all right?" Professor Rodriguez had become more than just an academic mentor over my 4 years at Northwestern. A successful architect who had built her own practice after facing her own family pressures in her 20s, she represented the kind of professional I hoped to become. Her office walls displayed awards from prestigious projects alongside photos of her travels to architectural marvels around the world. "I'm having some family complications," I admitted, settling into the comfortable chair across from her desk. My parents seemed to have changed their minds about my career plans. Changed their minds how? I explained the breakfast conversation, watching her expression grow more serious as I described my parents' sudden shift in perspective. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled thoughtfully. "Riley, in my experience, when parents suddenly reverse their support for a daughter's career ambitions, it's rarely about what they claim it's about. There's usually something else driving the change." "What do you mean?" "I mean that people don't typically spend 4 years encouraging something they fundamentally disapprove of. Something has changed in their circumstances, not their beliefs about your capabilities or what's appropriate for you." Her words planted a seed of suspicion that I tried to ignore. My parents had always been the most stable, predictable people in my world. The idea that they might be dealing with hidden pressures or changes seemed impossible. Meanwhile, my internship at Morrison & Associates was exceeding every expectation. The senior partners had begun including me in client meetings and asking for my input on design decisions. When James Morrison himself complimented my work on the waterfront project, I felt the familiar thrill of knowing I was exactly where I belonged. My best friend and roommate, Zoe Martinez, noticed my improvement in spirits during one of our evening study sessions. "You seem happier lately," she observed, looking up from her marketing textbooks. "Did things get better with your parents?" "I haven't talked to them much recently," I admitted, "but the internship is going incredibly well." Mr. Morrison hinted that they might have a position available after graduation. "That's amazing. Are you going to take it?" The question stopped me cold. 3 months earlier, the answer would have been automatic. I would gain some experience in Portland, then return to Connecticut to join the family firm. But now, with my parents' sudden reversal and the opportunities opening up at Morrison & Associates, I wasn't sure what I wanted anymore. "I think I might," I said slowly, surprised by my own words. "At least for a while. Maybe some distance would help me understand what's really going on at home." Zoe nodded approvingly. "You know, sometimes the best way to see a situation clearly is from the outside." As my graduation date approached, I found myself torn between excitement about my accomplishments and anxiety about facing my parents again. They had confirmed their attendance at the ceremony, but had been oddly distant during our few phone conversations. When I tried to discuss my potential job offer from Morrison and Associates, they changed the subject or gave non-committal responses. 2 weeks before graduation, I received an unexpected call from my grandmother, Rose Chen. My father's mother had always been a source of wisdom and comfort, and hearing her voice immediately lifted my spirits. "Riley dear, how are you feeling about graduation?" she asked in her gentle but direct way. "Excited but nervous," I replied honestly. "Grandma, has Dad said anything to you about my career plans?" He and Mom seem to have some concerns I don't understand. There was a long pause before she responded. "Your father is dealing with some complicated situations right now. I think he's trying to protect you from certain pressures, but he may not be handling it in the best way." "What kind of pressures?" "Business matters that aren't really my place to discuss," she said carefully. "But Riley, I want you to know that your education and your dreams are important. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise, even if they think they're acting in your best interest." Her words were cryptic but comforting. Grandma Rose had always been my strongest supporter, and knowing that she still believed in my path gave me strength as I prepared for what I hoped would be a celebration of my achievements.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The morning of graduation dawned clear and beautiful in Portland. Morrison Auditorium was filled with proud families as hundreds of students prepared to receive their degrees. I had earned the highest honors in my program, and my senior thesis on sustainable urban housing had been selected for the university's annual showcase. Despite my parents' recent distance, I felt proud of what I had accomplished. Zoe helped me adjust my cap and gown in the staging area behind the auditorium. "You look amazing," she said, smoothing down my honor cords. "Summa cum laude in architecture from Northwestern. Your parents must be bursting with pride." I smiled, hoping she was right. They seemed excited when I talked to them yesterday. Mom even mentioned taking photos by the fountain after the ceremony. As we lined up for the processional, I spotted my parents in the third row, looking elegant and composed as always. My father wore his best navy suit, and my mother had chosen a dress I'd never seen before in a shade of blue that complemented her silver hair perfectly. They waved when they saw me, and for a moment everything felt normal again. The ceremony was everything I had dreamed it would be. When Dean Harrison called my name to recognize my summa cum laude achievement, I felt a surge of pride and accomplishment that made all the late nights and challenging projects worthwhile. My parents were smiling and applauding, and I allowed myself to believe that whatever concerns they'd had about my future had been resolved. After the ceremony, we met outside the auditorium for photographs. The campus was buzzing with celebration as families captured memories against the backdrop of Northwestern's historic buildings. My parents seemed genuinely happy, asking me to pose in various locations and taking what felt like hundreds of pictures. "We're so proud of you, sweetheart," my mother said, adjusting my cap for another photo. "4 years of hard work, and look what you've achieved." "Thank you for supporting me through all of this," I replied, feeling emotional as I hugged them both. I know I haven't always been the easiest daughter, especially with all my questions about the family business lately. My father's expression shifted slightly, but he quickly smiled again. "Let's not worry about business today. Today is about celebrating your graduation." We had planned to have lunch at my favorite Portland restaurant, but as we walked toward their rental car, my father suggested we return to my apartment instead. "Your mother packed some special things for your graduation celebration," he said. "We thought it would be more meaningful to celebrate privately." Back in my small studio apartment, my parents seemed oddly formal as they arranged items they'd brought in a leather briefcase. The atmosphere felt more like a business meeting than a graduation celebration, and I began to feel the same unease I'd experienced during our breakfast conversation months earlier. "Riley," my father began, his voice taking on the tone he used during important client presentations. "Your graduation represents the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Your mother and I have given considerable thought to what that next chapter should look like. Dad, if this is about the Morrison and Associates offer, I want you to know that I haven't made any final decisions. We can absolutely discuss how that might fit with eventually joining Chen and Associates." "That's not what this is about," my mother said, reaching into the briefcase and withdrawing a manila envelope that seemed to carry unusual weight. "This is about securing your future in a way that makes sense for everyone involved." The envelope sat on my small dining table like a coiled snake. Everything in my apartment suddenly felt too small, too close, as if the walls were closing in around us. "What is that?" I asked, though some instinct already knew I didn't want to hear the answer. My father opened the envelope and withdrew a set of legal documents. "These are divorce papers," he said, matter-of-factly, as if he were discussing architectural specifications. "We need you to sign them." The world tilted sideways. I stared at the papers, then at my parents, then back at the papers, trying to process words that made no sense in any context I could understand. "Divorce papers." I repeated stupidly. "I'm not married." "What are you talking about?" "You're not married yet," my mother corrected. "These are pre-signed divorce documents for your future marriage to Alex Thompson." Alex Thompson. My heart stopped completely. Alex was a fellow architecture student who had become increasingly important to me over our final semester. We had been dating casually, and while our relationship held promise, we had never discussed anything as serious as marriage, let alone divorce. "I don't understand," I said, my voice sounding far away even to my own ears. "How do you even know about Alex? And why would you possibly think I need divorce papers for a relationship that might not even lead to marriage?" My father's expression was stern, businesslike, completely unlike the proud parent who had been taking my graduation photos just an hour earlier. "We know about Alex because it's our responsibility to know about the people in your life who might affect your future. And these papers are necessary because your marriage to him would create complications that none of us can afford." Complications. The word came out as almost a shout. What kind of complications could possibly justify bringing divorce papers to my college graduation? My mother stepped closer, and I could see something that looked almost like desperation behind her composed facade. "Riley, there are things about our family's situation that you don't understand yet. Business pressures, financial obligations, arrangements that were made before you were born. Your marriage to Alex Thompson would interfere with those arrangements in ways that could be devastating for all of us." The apartment spun around me as I tried to grasp what they were saying. Arrangements? What arrangements could possibly involve who I marry? "Sit down," my father said, and his voice carried authority that automatically made me comply. "It's time you understood exactly what your graduation really means for our family's future." As I sank into my desk chair, still wearing my cap and gown, still carrying the pride and joy of my academic achievements, my parents began to reveal a truth that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my life, my family, and my place in the world. The silence in my small apartment stretched until it became unbearable. My parents sat across from me like strangers delivering a business proposal, their faces masks of composed determination that I'd never seen before. The graduation cap slipped from my head as I leaned forward, trying to process their words about arrangements and obligations that somehow involved my personal relationships. "What arrangements?" I asked again, my voice barely steady. "And how does any of this justify bringing divorce papers to my graduation?" My father reached into his briefcase again, this time withdrawing a folder thick with documents. "Riley Chen and Associates isn't just a family business. It's part of a larger network of partnerships and investments that have sustained our family's lifestyle for the past 15 years. He spread several contracts across my small dining table, their legal language dense and intimidating. Even with my limited understanding of business documents, I could see names I recognized from Connecticut's most prominent families and corporations. "When you were 7 years old," my mother continued, "we entered into a strategic partnership with Sterling Development Corporation. Robert Sterling became our primary investor and partner, providing the capital that allowed your father's firm to expand beyond residential projects into commercial development." Robert Sterling. I knew the name from society pages and business journals. His family had been Connecticut royalty for generations, their wealth built on everything from shipping to real estate to technology investments. But I had never understood what connection he might have to our family beyond occasional mentions in my parents' dinner conversations. "Part of that partnership agreement," my father said, pointing to a specific section of one document, included provisions for future family alliances. Sterling has a son, Marcus Sterling, who is 28 and being groomed to take over significant portions of the family empire. The pieces began clicking together with horrible clarity. "You're talking about an arranged marriage." We're talking about a strategic alliance that would benefit both families. My mother corrected, Marcus is intelligent, well-educated, and from a family that shares our values. You would want for nothing, and your children would inherit opportunities that most people can only dream of. I stared at them, waiting for some sign that this was an elaborate joke or test. When none came, I felt something cold and sharp settle in my chest. And Alex threatens this arrangement because any existing romantic attachment would complicate your availability for this alliance, my father said bluntly. The Sterlings have been patient, allowing you to complete your education before formalizing the arrangement. But they won't wait indefinitely while you develop serious relationships with unsuitable men. Unsuitable. The word hit me like a slap. Alex Thompson was brilliant, kind, and shared my passion for sustainable architecture. His family wasn't wealthy, but he had earned his place at Northwestern through merit and hard work. The idea that his worth as a human being could be dismissed based on his financial background made me feel sick. So you want me to sign divorce papers for a man I'm not even married to clear the way for me to marry someone I've never met, to fulfill a contract you signed when I was a child. My voice was rising despite my efforts to stay calm. The divorce papers are a precaution, my mother explained with the same tone she might use to discuss insurance policies. They ensure that if you do marry Alex impulsively, the marriage can be dissolved quickly and quietly without creating scandal or complications for the Sterling alliance. I stood up abruptly, my graduation gown swirling around me like a cape. Have you lost your minds? I'm 22 years old. I just graduated summa cum laude from one of the best architecture programs in the country. I have job offers and a future I've worked incredibly hard to build. And you want me to throw all of that away to marry a stranger for a business deal? You're being dramatic, my father said, but I caught a flicker of uncertainty in his expression.
This isn't about throwing away your future. It's about securing a better future than anything you could build on your own. Better, according to who? I love architecture. I'm good at it. I have the potential to make real contributions to sustainable design and urban planning. How is giving that up to become some wealthy man's trophy wife a better future? My mother's composure cracked slightly. Riley, you don't understand the financial pressures we're facing. The Sterling partnership isn't just beneficial anymore, it's necessary. Your father's firm has expanded rapidly, and we've made commitments that require Sterling's continued support. What kind of commitments? Investment commitments, equipment purchases, office expansions. We've leveraged our future earnings based on the assumption that the Sterling alliance would proceed as planned. My father's voice carried a strain I'd never heard before. If this arrangement falls through, we could lose everything. The truth hit me like a physical blow. My parents hadn't suddenly decided that my career was inappropriate for women. They had sold my future to secure their business expansion, and now they were trapped by their own choices. You spent money you didn't have based on the assumption that you could sell me to the highest bidder? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. We invested in our family's future based on agreements that were beneficial to everyone involved, my mother said defensively. Including you. Marcus Sterling could provide you with a lifestyle and opportunities that no architecture career could match. Opportunities like what? Shopping and hosting dinner parties? Having my career reduced to a hobby because my husband's money makes work unnecessary? I was shaking now, adrenaline and fury coursing through me in equal measures. Opportunities like financial security, social position, and the ability to pursue your interests without the pressure of supporting yourself, my father said. You could still practice architecture as a passionate pursuit rather than a necessity. And what if I want it to be a necessity? What if I want to build something meaningful with my own skills and intelligence rather than living off someone else's money? The question hung in the air while my parents exchanged glances that spoke of conversations I hadn't been part of. I realized that they had never seriously considered the possibility that I might reject their arrangement. In their minds, they were offering me an upgrade from a challenging career to a comfortable life, and my resistance was simply youthful idealism that would pass. Riley, my mother said, her voice taking on a pleading quality that was almost worse than her earlier businesslike tone. You have to understand that this isn't just about you anymore. Your father's reputation, our family's stability, your brother's medical practice, everything is connected to our partnership with Sterling Development. Marcus's medical practice, what does his career have to do with any of this? Sterling's investment portfolio includes significant healthcare holdings, my father explained reluctantly.
The network of connections has helped your brother establish his practice much faster than would normally be possible. The scope of their deception was breathtaking. My brother's success, which I had attributed to his intelligence and dedication, was partially built on the same arrangement that was now being used to control my life. I wondered if Marcus even knew about the strings being pulled behind his career. Does Marcus know about this arrangement? I asked. Your brother knows that our family has beneficial business relationships that have helped his career, my mother said carefully. He doesn't need to know the specific details. The specific details being that his little sister was promised in marriage to secure those relationships. The specific details being that our family's success requires everyone to make contributions, my father said, his voice hardening again. Marcus contributes through his medical career, which reflects well on our family and strengthens our social connections. You contribute by making a marriage that secures our financial foundation. I felt like I was looking at my parents through glass, seeing familiar faces distorted by revelations that changed everything I thought I knew about them. These were people who had taught me to value hard work, integrity, and pursuing my dreams. Now they were asking me to abandon all of those principles to fix their financial mistakes. What happens if I refuse? I asked quietly. The silence that followed was answer enough, but my father spelled it out anyway. If you refuse to honor this arrangement, Sterling will withdraw from our partnership, we'll lose the firm, the house, everything we've built. Your education, your brother's career support, our family's reputation, all of it will be gone. And you'll disown me. We'll have no choice, my mother said, and for the first time her voice cracked with genuine emotion. If you destroy this opportunity through selfishness, we won't be able to maintain our relationship with you. The word selfishness struck me like a physical blow. Wanting to control my own life, to marry someone I chose, to pursue the career I had worked toward for 4 years. All of this was selfish in their eyes because it threatened their financial security. So either I sign these divorce papers and agree to marry Marcus Sterling, or I lose my family, my support system, and everything I've ever known. You're not losing anything, my father said. You're gaining opportunities that most women would be grateful for. Most women would be grateful to have their futures sold without their consent. Most women would be grateful to have access to the kind of life the Sterling family can provide, my mother corrected. Financial security, social status, beautiful homes, the ability to travel and pursue interests without worrying about money. And if Marcus Sterling turns out to be controlling, abusive, or simply incompatible with me, the Sterling family has an excellent reputation, my father said dismissively. Robert Sterling is a respected businessman and philanthropist. There's no reason to assume his son would be anything other than a good husband. I realized that my parents had never seriously considered my happiness or compatibility as factors in this arrangement. They were thinking about financial statements and social connections, not about whether I could build a loving relationship with the man they wanted me to marry. Have you met Marcus Sterling? I asked. We've met him at several social functions, my mother replied. He's charming, well-educated, and quite handsome. You'll find him perfectly suitable. Suitable, the word felt like a prison sentence. I thought about Alex Thompson, whose eyes lit up when he talked about designing affordable housing, who stayed up until 3 in the morning helping me perfect my thesis presentation, who made me laugh until my sides hurt. Alex wasn't suitable by my parents' standards because he came from a middle-class family and would need to build his career from the ground up. But he was extraordinary in ways that had nothing to do with bank accounts or family names. What about love? I asked, knowing the question was futile but needing to ask it anyway. Love is a luxury that people in our position can't always afford, my father said. Compatibility and mutual respect are more reliable foundations for marriage than romantic feelings. Did you love each other when you got married? The question seemed to catch them off guard. My parents looked at each other with expressions I couldn't read, and for a moment their unified front wavered. We learned to love each other, my mother said finally. We built a good life together based on shared goals and mutual support. But you weren't forced into marriage to pay off someone else's debts. We had pressures and obligations you don't understand, my father said sharply. Every generation faces challenges that require sacrifice. This is yours. I walked to my apartment window and stared out at the Portland skyline, where buildings I had studied and admired reached toward a sky that suddenly felt impossibly distant. Just hours earlier, I had been a newly graduated architect with the world spread out before me like a blueprint waiting to be realized.
Now I felt like a commodity being negotiated between business partners. I need time to think, I said without turning around. There isn't much time, my mother replied. The Sterlings are expecting an answer within the week. They've been patient, but they have other options they could pursue if this arrangement doesn't proceed. Other options? I wondered if there were other young women somewhere being presented with similar choices, their futures being weighed against their family. And finally, what other options? There are several families with daughters of appropriate age and background, my father said. The Sterlings prefer our family because of the business synergies, but they're not dependent on this specific alliance. The message was clear. I was replaceable in this transaction, but the consequences of my replacement would fall entirely on my family. My parents had structured the situation so that refusing felt like destroying the lives of everyone I loved. I want to see the original contract, I said, turning back to face them. The one you signed when I was 7. I want to understand exactly what you committed to. My father hesitated, then pulled another document from his briefcase. The contract was 12 pages long, dense with legal language that would take time to fully understand. But even scanning it quickly, I could see provisions that made my stomach turn. Clauses about suitable marriage arrangements, timelines for completion of the alliance, and penalties for breach of family obligations. You literally sold me, I said, the words feeling strange and hollow in my mouth. We secured your future, my mother countered. And our family's future. Everything we've done has been to create opportunities and stability for you and your brother. By taking away my right to choose my own path. By ensuring that your path leads somewhere secure and prosperous, rather than leaving you to struggle in an uncertain world. I set the contract down carefully, my hands trembling with the effort to stay calm. What if I could find another solution? What if there was a way to pay off Sterling without sacrificing my marriage? There isn't, my father said flatly. The amounts involved are far beyond anything you could earn as an architect, even with the most successful career imaginable. How much are we talking about? $3.7 million, my mother said quietly. Plus ongoing partnership obligations that add up to significantly more over time. The number was staggering. My parents were right that no architecture career could generate enough money to resolve this debt, at least not quickly enough to satisfy Sterling's timeline. But hearing the specific amount also clarified something important. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about power and control, about two families treating their children like chess pieces in a game I had never agreed to play. I need to call Professor Rodriguez, I said, reaching for my phone. Absolutely not, my father said sharply. This is a private family matter. Involving outsiders would only complicate the situation and potentially damage our negotiations with Sterling. Professor Rodriguez isn't an outsider. She's my mentor and advisor. If I'm supposed to make a decision this important, I deserve to get counsel from someone who actually cares about my welfare. We care about your welfare, my mother protested. Everything we're doing is because we care about your future. You care about your future, I corrected. You care about saving your business and maintaining your lifestyle. My welfare is secondary to your financial problems. The accusation hung in the air like smoke, acrid and undeniable. My parents couldn't deny it because it was true, and we all knew it. You have until Friday to sign the papers, my father said, standing up and beginning to pack the documents back into his briefcase. If you refuse, we'll have no choice but to inform Sterling that the arrangement is off, and begin preparing for the consequences. And if you sign, we'll arrange for you to meet Marcus Sterling next weekend. The formal engagement can be announced within the month, with a wedding planned for this fall. This fall, less than 6 months away. The timeline felt like a countdown to my execution, each day bringing me closer to a life I couldn't imagine wanting. What about my job offer from Morrison & Associates? You'll need to decline it, my mother said. It would be inappropriate for Marcus Sterling's fiancée to work for another architecture firm, and it would send the wrong message about your priorities. So not only do I have to marry someone I don't love, I also have to give up the career I've worked toward my entire adult life. You can pursue architecture as a hobby, my father said, as if he were offering a generous compromise. Marcus Sterling's wife will have plenty of time and resources to explore personal interests. Personal interests. My career, my passion, my life's work reduced to a personal interest that I could pursue in my spare time between charity luncheons and social obligations.
After my parents left, I sat in my apartment surrounded by the debris of my graduation day.
Oh.
My cap and gown lay draped over a chair, my honor cords tangled on the floor where they had fallen during our confrontation. The manila envelope sat on my dining table like a bomb that hadn't exploded yet, its contents capable of destroying everything I had built, or everything my family had built, depending on what I chose to do. I called Professor Rodriguez, despite my father's prohibition.
Oh.
If I was going to make a decision this important, I needed advice from someone who understood both the architecture world and the complexities of family pressure. Riley, she answered on the second ring. How was graduation? Are you celebrating? Professor Rodriguez, I need help, I said, and then the whole story poured out of me in a rush of words and tears that left me exhausted and shaking. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Riley, I'm so sorry. This is an incredibly difficult situation, and your parents have put you in an impossible position. What would you do? I can't make this decision for you, she said carefully. But I can tell you that in my experience, decisions made from fear and pressure rarely lead to happiness. And I can tell you that your talent and passion for architecture are real, valuable things that the world needs. But what if I'm being selfish? What if my family really does lose everything because I'm too stubborn to make a sacrifice? The sacrifice they're asking you to make isn't temporary or partial, she said. They're asking you to give up your autonomy, your career, your right to choose your own partner, essentially your right to be yourself. That's not a sacrifice, that's selling your soul. Her words gave me the first moment of clarity I'd had since my parents revealed their arrangement. The choice wasn't between being selfish and being generous. It was between preserving my identity and surrendering it to fix someone else's mistakes. Professor Rodriguez, what if there was another way? What if I could find a solution that didn't require me to marry Marcus Sterling, but also didn't destroy my family? What kind of solution are you thinking about? I don't know yet, but there has to be something. Some way to approach this that my parents haven't considered. Riley, be very careful. When people are desperate,
Oh.
they sometimes make promises they can't keep or take risks that make their situations worse. But I can't just accept that my only choices are marrying a stranger or destroying my family. There has to be a third option. After we hung up, I spent the rest of the evening researching Sterling Development Corporation, trying to understand the scope of their business and the nature of their partnership with my father's firm. What I found was more disturbing than I had expected. Sterling Development wasn't just a successful company, it was an empire built on acquiring smaller firms and either absorbing them completely or maintaining control through debt and partnership agreements. Chen and Associates wasn't Sterling's only partner, it was one of dozens of businesses that had become dependent on Sterling's capital and connections. More troubling, several online forums and business publications mention concerns about Sterling's business practices, particularly their tendency to use personal leverage and family connections to maintain control over their partners. While nothing I found suggested anything illegal, the pattern was clear. Sterling didn't just make business deals, they created dependency relationships that were difficult to escape. As I read deeper into the company's history, I began to understand that my
Oh.
Batenda went about securing my family's financial future. It was about ensuring that my father's firm would never be able to operate independently again. Once I married Marcus Sterling, my family would be permanently connected to Sterling Development through both business and blood,
Oh.
making it impossible for them to ever break free or compete. The realization made me feel sick,
Oh.
but it also sparked something that felt like hope. If Sterling's control was based on dependency and personal leverage, then maybe there was a way to break that dependency and remove their leverage. It would require careful planning and probably some risk,
Oh.
but it might be possible to free my family without sacrificing my future. I spent the next 2 days researching everything I could find about Sterling Development, their business practices, their competitors, and their vulnerabilities. I also reached out quietly to some of my father's industry contacts, trying to understand the broader landscape of commercial architecture in Connecticut and whether there might be alternatives to the Sterling partnership. What I discovered was both encouraging and terrifying. Sterling Development was powerful and well-connected, but they weren't invulnerable. Several of their recent projects had faced cost overruns and delays, and there were rumors that their aggressive expansion strategy had left them overextended in some markets.
More importantly, I learned that the commercial architecture market in Connecticut was more competitive than my parents had led me to believe. There were other developers and investment groups that might be interested in partnering with a firm like Chen and Associates, especially if that firm could offer innovative sustainable design solutions that were becoming increasingly popular. By Wednesday evening, the outline of a plan was beginning to form in my mind. It was risky and would require me to take actions that my parents would almost certainly oppose, but it offered something that their arrangement with Sterling never could: the possibility of genuine freedom for all of us. The plan would require help though, and the first person I needed to convince was Alex Thompson. If I was going to fight for my right to choose my own future, I needed to know whether that future included him, and whether he was willing to take the risks that freedom would require. I found Alex Thompson in the university library Thursday morning, hunched over architectural drawings in the same corner study carrel, where we'd spent countless late nights working on our respective projects. The sight of him bent over his work, pencil tucked behind his ear in that absent-minded way he had, made my chest tighten with a mixture of affection and desperation. I was about to ask him to risk everything for a plan that might not work, and I wasn't even sure I had the right to make such a request. "Hey stranger," he said without looking up, recognizing my footsteps. "I was wondering when you'd surface after graduation. Your parents keep you busy celebrating." The casual question hit harder than it should have. Alex had no idea that my graduation celebration had turned into a hostage negotiation, or that his existence had somehow become a threat to my fate. I slid into the chair beside him, studying his profile as he continued sketching details for what looked like a community center design. "Alex, I need to tell you something important, and I need to ask you something that might sound completely insane." He set down his pencil and turned to face me fully, his expression shifting to concern as he took in my appearance. I hadn't slept much in the past few days, and I knew it showed in the dark circles under my eyes and the tension around my mouth. "Riley, what's wrong? You look like you haven't slept since graduation." "I haven't, not really." I took a deep breath, trying to figure out how to explain a situation that still felt surreal to me. My parents came to graduation with some unexpected news about my future. It turns out they've had plans for me that I knew nothing about. Over the next 30 minutes, I told Alex everything. The arranged marriage, the Sterling Development Partnership, the financial obligations that had trapped my family, the divorce papers my parents wanted me to sign as insurance against our relationship. I watched his expression change from confusion to disbelief, to something that looked like barely controlled anger. "They brought divorce papers to your graduation," he said slowly, as if testing whether the words made any more sense when spoken aloud. "For a marriage that doesn't exist. To clear the way for a marriage you don't want." "That's exactly right, and if you refuse they'll disown you and lose everything they've built." Alex leaned back in his chair, running his hands through his hair in a gesture I'd seen him make when facing particularly complex design problems. "Riley, I don't even have words for how messed up this is." "I know, but Alex, I think there might be another way. I've been researching Sterling Development, and I think they might be more vulnerable than they appear.
If I could find a way to break my family's dependence on them, or expose problems with their business practices, maybe I could create leverage of my own." "What kind of leverage?" I pulled out my laptop and opened the files I'd been compiling. Sterling Development has been acquiring smaller firms and creating these partnership arrangements for years, but some of their recent projects have had serious problems. Cost overruns, environmental violations, labor disputes. They're good at controlling information, but they can't hide everything. Alex leaned over to look at my screen, scanning the articles and financial reports I'd gathered. "You're thinking about going public with this information. I'm thinking about presenting them with a choice. Either they release my family from their partnership agreement voluntarily, or I make their business problems very public and very expensive." "Riley, that's incredibly dangerous. These aren't people who back down from fights, especially fights with college students who threaten their reputation." "I know it's dangerous. But what's the alternative? I marry Marcus Sterling and spend the rest of my life as a trophy wife while you and I pretend we never meant anything to each other." The question hung between us, and I realized that I'd been dancing around something important without addressing it directly. Alex and I had been dating casually, but we'd never defined our relationship or talked about long-term possibilities. Now I was essentially asking him to help me fight for a future that included him, without knowing if he wanted that future too.
Riley, he said carefully, before we talk about fighting Sterling Development or exposing their business practices, I need to know something. When you talk about choosing your own future, what exactly are you choosing? Are you fighting for the right to date me casually, or are you fighting for something more serious? The directness of his question caught me off guard, but I realized he deserved an honest answer. I'm fighting for the right to make my own choices about everything. My career, my relationships, my life. But if I'm being completely honest, yes, I'm hoping that future includes you. Not because my parents oppose you, but because I care about you and I think we could build something amazing together. Even though I'm not wealthy, and I can't offer you the kind of lifestyle Marcus Sterling could provide. Especially because of that. Alex, I don't want someone else's money or someone else's vision of what my life should be. I want to build something with my own hands and my own intelligence, with someone who respects my goals and shares my values. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the architectural drawings scattered across the table. When he looked up, his expression was determined in a way I'd never seen before. Okay, he said simply, what do you need me to do? The relief that flooded through me was so intense it was almost dizzying. You're willing to help, even though it could get complicated and potentially dangerous. Riley, someone is trying to sell you like property to pay off their debts. If you want to fight that, I'm with you. What's the plan? I spread out the research I'd compiled, showing him the pattern of problems I'd identified with Sterling Development projects. I think the key is finding something they can't afford to have exposed. Something that would cost them more than they'd lose, by releasing my family from their partnership. What kind of thing are you looking for? Environmental violations, safety code violations, tax irregularities, anything that could trigger government investigations or lawsuits. Sterling Development's power is based on their reputation and their ability to attract investors. If that reputation gets damaged badly enough, they become vulnerable. Alex studied my notes, his expression growing more serious as he absorbed the scope of what I was proposing. This isn't just about gathering information, is it? You're talking about essentially blackmailing one of the most powerful development companies in Connecticut. I'm talking about using the truth to create negotiating leverage. If Sterling Development has been cutting corners or violating regulations, exposing that isn't blackmail, it's accountability. And if they haven't, if all your research turns up minor problems that aren't serious enough to threaten their business. The question struck at the heart of my deepest fear. What if Sterling Development was exactly what they appeared to be, a successful legitimate company that had simply made a business arrangement with my family? What if my parents were right, that refusing their arrangement would destroy everything without serving any greater purpose? Then I'll have to decide whether I'm willing to sacrifice my family's security for my own autonomy, I said quietly. But Alex, I can't make that choice without exploring every other possibility first. He nodded slowly. What can I do to help? I need someone who understands construction and environmental regulations to help me analyze some of Sterling's recent projects. You did that internship with the environmental consulting firm last summer. You know what to look for in terms of permit violations and safety issues. I can do that. What else? I need help figuring out how to approach this strategically. If I find problems with Sterling's projects, how do I use that information effectively? Who do I contact? How do I make sure they take me seriously? Alex was quiet for a moment, then pulled out his phone. I might know someone who can help with that. My uncle works for an investigative journalism unit at the Hartford Courant. He specializes in business and government corruption stories. Would he be willing to look at what we find? If there's a real story there, absolutely. But Riley, once you involve a journalist, this stops being something you can control privately. If we find evidence of serious problems, it's going to become public whether Sterling wants it to or not. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. Going public with Sterling's problems would certainly get their attention, but it would also make me a target of their retaliation in ways I might not be prepared for. Let me think about that part, I said. For now, let's focus on finding out what's actually there. We spent the rest of the day diving into public records, construction permits, and environmental impact reports related to Sterling Development projects. The work was tedious and technical, but Alex's internship experience proved invaluable in helping me understand what we were looking at. By evening, we had identified 3 projects that showed signs of potential problems. A commercial development in Hartford that had received multiple stop work orders for safety violations. A residential complex in Stamford where environmental groups had filed complaints about wetland destruction. And most interesting, a luxury hotel project in Greenwich where the construction timeline and budget had both spiraled far beyond the original projections. The Greenwich Hotel is the most promising, Alex said, reviewing our notes. Look at this timeline. They broke ground 18 months ago with a projected completion date of last month. But according to the latest permit applications, they're still dealing with foundation problems and environmental remediation. What kind of environmental remediation? Soil contamination, probably from whatever was on the site before. But here's the interesting part. The environmental impact assessment they filed with the city shows minimal contamination that should have been easy to clean up. Either they lied in their initial assessment, or they've discovered problems they didn't anticipate. I studied the documents Alex had pulled up on his laptop. And either way, it's costing them money and time they didn't plan for. Exactly. And there's something else. Look at the construction loan documents that are part of the public record. They've had to request 3 extensions and 2 additional funding sources to keep the project going, which suggests they're in deeper financial trouble than they want to admit. That's what it looks like to me. Riley, if Sterling Development is struggling financially, that changes the whole dynamic of your situation. They might need your family's partnership more than your parents realize. The possibility that Sterling Development was more desperate than powerful hadn't occurred to me. I'd been thinking of them as an unassailable force that held all the leverage in their relationship with my family. But if they were facing their own financial pressures, that could explain why they were so insistent on the marriage arrangement proceeding on schedule. We need more information, I said. And we need to be careful about how we get it. Friday morning brought a call from my mother that I'd been dreading. Riley, have you made your decision about the papers? She asked without preamble. I'm still thinking, I said, which was technically true even though my thinking had moved far beyond simple acceptance or refusal. There isn't much more time to think. The Sterlings are expecting an answer today, and they've been very patient with this process. Patient with what process? I never agreed to be part of any process. You're part of this family, which means you're part of the obligations this family has accepted. Riley, I need you to understand that refusing to sign those papers isn't just about you anymore. Your decision affects all of us. The guilt manipulation was so blatant it almost made me angry, but I forced myself to stay calm. Mom, what if there was another way to handle the Sterling situation? What if the partnership could be restructured or refinanced without requiring me to marry Marcus? There isn't another way. We've explored every option. Have you talked to other investors or developers? Have you considered that Sterling might need this partnership as much as you do? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Riley, what are you talking about? I'm talking about the possibility that you've been so focused on meeting Sterling's demands that you haven't considered whether you have any leverage of your own. We don't have any leverage, we owe them money and we need their continued support to stay in business. What if that's not entirely true? What if Sterling Development is having their own financial problems and can't afford to lose partners like Dad's firm? Riley, where are you getting these ideas? You don't understand business or the complexity of our situation. I understand more than you think I do. And I understand that selling your daughter to cover your debts isn't the only solution to financial problems. The conversation ended badly, with my mother hanging up after making it clear that I had until 6 o'clock that evening to sign the divorce papers or face the consequences of my selfishness. But her reaction to my questions about Sterling's financial stability had been telling. She'd seemed genuinely surprised by the suggestion that Sterling might be vulnerable, which suggested that my parents had never seriously investigated alternatives to their arrangement. That afternoon, Alex and I met with his uncle James Morrison at a coffee shop near the Hartford Courant offices. James was in his 50s, with the kind of skeptical expression that I imagine came from years of investigating stories that people didn't want told. Alex says you've uncovered some information about Sterling Development that might be newsworthy, he said without small talk. What exactly are we talking about? I explained my situation carefully, focusing on the business aspects rather than the personal drama. James listened without interrupting, taking notes in a small notebook that looked like it had seen years of use. The arranged marriage angle is interesting, but not really something I can pursue journalistically, he said when I finished. That's a private family matter, even if it's connected to business arrangements. But the potential financial and regulatory problems you've identified, those could be legitimate stories if you can document them properly. What would you need to pursue a story like that? More evidence than what you've shown me so far.
Public records are a good start, but I'd need to confirm the information with sources inside Sterling Development or with regulatory agencies. And I'd need to be very careful about how I approach this, because Sterling has enough money and legal resources to make life difficult for journalists who write unflattering stories. Alex leaned forward. What if Riley could provide you with insider access to Sterling's financial information? How would she do that? By accepting their arrangement temporarily and getting close enough to Marcus Sterling to access internal company documents. The suggestion hit me like cold water. Alex, what are you talking about? Think about it, if you agreed to the engagement, you'd have access to the Sterling family and probably to information about their business that isn't available to the public. You could gather evidence from the inside. James looked interested despite himself. That's actually not a terrible idea from an investigative standpoint. But it would put Riley in an incredibly dangerous position. If Sterling Development figures out what she's doing, they could destroy her and her family without breaking a sweat. And it would mean pretending to go along with an arrangement I fundamentally oppose. I added I'd have to lie to Marcus Sterling, to his family, to my own parents. I'd have to pretend to be the kind of woman who would sell herself for financial security. But it might be the only way to gather enough evidence to expose them, Alex said. And if you could prove that Sterling Development is in serious financial trouble, or that they've been violating regulations, you might be able to free your family from their partnership entirely. The idea was both brilliant and terrifying. Going undercover as Marcus Sterling's fiancé would give me access to information I could never get any other way. But it would also mean walking into the enemy's stronghold with no backup plan and no guarantee that I could get out safely. Riley, James said carefully, if you're seriously considering this approach, you need to understand that once you start gathering evidence against Sterling Development, there's no going back. They'll figure out eventually that someone is investigating them, and they'll use every resource they have to find out who and why. But if I could get enough evidence to expose serious problems with their business, if you could document genuine fraud, environmental violations, or regulatory violations that cost them hundreds of millions of dollars, and triggered government investigations, then yes, you might have enough leverage to negotiate your family's freedom. And if I can't find that level of evidence, then you'll be trapped in an engagement to a man you don't love, surrounded by people who will be watching for any sign that you're not what you appear to be. I stared into my coffee cup, trying to imagine myself playing the role of a happy fiancé, while secretly gathering evidence against my future husband's family. The psychological toll would be enormous, and the risks were almost unthinkable. But the alternative was accepting defeat without ever trying to fight. I need to think about this, I said finally. Don't think too long, James replied. If you're going to do this, you need to start soon. The longer you wait, the more suspicious your sudden compliance will seem. That evening, I called my parents just before their 6 o'clock deadline. Mom, I've made my decision about the papers. Thank goodness. We were so worried that you were going to do something foolish. I'll sign them. But I have some conditions. There was a pause. What kind of conditions? I want to meet Marcus Sterling before I agree to anything permanent. I want to understand what kind of man I'm being asked to marry and what our life together would look like. Of course, dear. We've already arranged for you to meet him this weekend. And I want to be involved in planning the engagement and wedding. If I'm going to do this, I want some control over how it happens. That's perfectly reasonable. I'm so relieved that you've come to your senses. I also want to understand the Sterling family's expectations for my role in their business and social activities. If I'm going to be Marcus Sterling's wife, I need to know what that means. We can arrange for you to spend time with the family and learn about their expectations. Riley, I'm so proud of you for making the mature choice. After I hung up, I sat in my apartment trying to process what I had just committed to do. In the space of a week, I had gone from being a newly graduated architect with a bright future to being a woman preparing to infiltrate one of Connecticut's most powerful families in hopes of finding evidence that could destroy them. The plan was dangerous, possibly foolish, and would require me to become someone I'd never been before. But it was also the only path I could see that offered any hope of freedom for both me and my family. Saturday morning, I drove to Connecticut to sign the divorce papers and meet my future husband for the first time. The Sterling estate in Greenwich made our family home look modest by comparison. As I drove through the wrought iron gates that Saturday afternoon, I counted 3 separate buildings on the property, including what appeared to be a guest house larger than most people's primary residences.
Manicured lawns stretched in every direction, interrupted by fountains and sculptured gardens that probably cost more to maintain than most families' annual income. I parked my modest Honda Civic between a Mercedes and a Tesla, feeling like an imposter before I'd even stepped out of the car. The woman walking down the front steps to greet me looked like she'd stepped out of a society magazine. Her blonde hair perfectly styled, despite the afternoon breeze, her cream-colored dress expensive enough to pay for a semester of college tuition. "You must be Riley," she said, extending a manicured hand with a smile that seemed genuine. "I'm Catherine Sterling, Marcus's mother. We're so thrilled to finally meet you." Catherine Sterling was younger than I'd expected, probably in her early 50s, with the kind of polished elegance that came from a lifetime of wealth and privilege. Her voice carried the slight accent of someone who had attended the best private schools, and her movements had the unconscious grace of a woman who had never doubted her place in the world. "Thank you for having me, Mrs. Sterling. Your home is absolutely beautiful. Please call me Catherine. We're going to be family after all." She linked her arm through mine as we walked toward the house, a gesture that felt both welcoming and possessive. "Marcus is finishing up a conference call, but he should be done shortly. I thought we could have some tea and get acquainted while we wait." The interior of the Sterling home was as impressive as the exterior, filled with antiques and artwork that spoke of generations of accumulated wealth. Catherine led me to a sunroom overlooking the gardens, where a tea service had been arranged on a table that looked like it belonged in a museum. "I have to tell you, Riley, your parents speak so highly of you. A summa cum laude graduate in architecture from Northwestern, that's quite an accomplishment." "Thank you, I've worked very hard for it." "I'm sure you have. Marcus will appreciate that. He's always been drawn to intelligent, accomplished women." Catherine poured tea from a delicate china pot, her movements practiced and elegant. "Of course, once you're married, you'll find that your priorities naturally shift toward supporting your husband's career and managing your social obligations." The casual assumption that marriage would end my professional ambitions made my stomach clench, but I forced myself to smile. "What kind of social obligations?" "Oh, the usual things. Charity work, entertaining business associates, maintaining the family's social connections. It's quite fulfilling work, really knowing that you're contributing to causes that matter, and helping your husband build important relationships." "And Marcus is comfortable with the idea of his wife having her own career as well?" Catherine's smile flickered for just a moment. "Well, I suppose that would depend on the demands of the career. The Sterling family has certain expectations about the role of wives in maintaining our social position and supporting our business interests. But I'm sure you and Marcus can work out arrangements that satisfy everyone." The careful phrasing told me everything I needed to know about the Sterling family's expectations for women. My architecture career would be tolerated as long as it didn't interfere with my primary role as Marcus Sterling's wife and social accessory. "Catherine, may I ask you something personal?" "Of course, dear. Did you work before you married Mr. Sterling?" "I did, actually.
I was a financial analyst for an investment firm in Manhattan. Quite good at it, too." Her expression grew wistful, but when Robert and I married, it became clear that my time was better spent supporting his career and raising Marcus. The Sterling family business requires that level of dedication from everyone involved. "Do you ever miss it, your work in finance?" "Sometimes," she admitted, and for a moment her polished facade slipped enough to reveal something that looked like regret. "But life is about making choices, Riley. I chose to build something meaningful with Robert, and I've never regretted that choice." The conversation was interrupted by footsteps in the hallway, and Catherine's expression immediately brightened. "That must be Marcus now." Marcus Sterling entered the sunroom with the kind of confident stride that suggested he'd never encountered a space where he didn't belong. He was handsome in the conventional way that money could enhance, perfectly groomed, expensively dressed, with the kind of athletic build that came from personal trainers and private gym memberships. But there was something in his eyes that made me immediately wary, a calculating quality that reminded me uncomfortably of a predator evaluating potential prey. "Riley," he said, crossing the room to take my hand. "I apologize for keeping you waiting. Business calls have a way of running longer than expected." His handshake was firm but lasted just a moment too long, and his smile never quite reached his eyes. Everything about his demeanor suggested someone who was accustomed to getting what he wanted through charm and persistence. "It's nice to meet you, Marcus. Your mother has been telling me about your family's expectations for marriage." "Has she? I hope she hasn't scared you off with talk of social obligations and charity work." His laugh sounded practiced, like a joke he'd made many times before.
The truth is, Riley, being part of the Sterling family opens doors to opportunities that most people can only dream of. You'd have access to resources and connections that could make any project you're passionate about possible. What kind of projects? Whatever interests you. Architecture certainly, though probably more on the philanthropic side than the commercial side. Historic preservation perhaps, or designing facilities for worthy causes. The kind of work that makes a real difference in the world. The patronizing tone made my teeth clench, but I forced myself to look interested. That sounds wonderful. Though I have to admit, I'm also passionate about sustainable commercial design and affordable housing projects. Marcus's expression didn't change, but I caught a flicker of something that might have been impatience. Of course, those are important issues. Though I think you'll find that the most effective way to address problems like affordable housing is through policy and philanthropy rather than individual projects. You don't think there's value in hands-on design work. I think there's value in working at a level where you can create systemic change rather than just addressing symptoms. His tone suggested he was explaining something obvious to a child. When you have access to the kind of resources and influence the Sterling family can provide, you can accomplish much more through strategic philanthropy than through individual architectural projects. Catherine nodded approvingly. Marcus has always been very thoughtful about using our family's position to create positive change in the world. I spent the next hour listening to Marcus explain his vision for how my life would improve once I became part of his family's world. The conversation felt like a sales presentation designed to convince me that giving up my autonomy was actually an upgrade. Marcus was intelligent and articulate, but there was an underlying arrogance in everything he said that made it clear he'd never seriously considered the possibility that someone might prefer independence to the security he was offering. "I'd love to show you around the property," Marcus said as we finished our tea. "We have some beautiful walking trails and the view from the top of the hill is spectacular." As we walked through the Sterling family's gardens, Marcus pointed out features with the pride of someone showing off a prized possession. Everything about the property was designed to impress, from the imported marble fountains to the carefully curated sculpture collections scattered throughout the grounds. "This will all be yours someday," Marcus said as we reached a gazebo overlooking the estate. "Well, ours, I should say. The Sterling family believes in sharing our resources with the people we care about." It's certainly impressive, though I have to admit I've always been more interested in creating beautiful spaces than in owning them. That's a charming perspective and very artistic. But I think you'll find that ownership gives you the freedom to create in ways that working for clients never could. Marcus moved closer, his voice taking on a more intimate tone. "Riley, I want you to know that I understand this arrangement isn't entirely conventional, but I believe we could build something really meaningful together." "What would that look like?" "Partnership. Mutual support. The kind of marriage where both people bring their strengths to create something larger than either could achieve alone." His hand found mine, and I fought the urge to pull away. "I have the resources and connections to make your architectural dreams possible on a scale you've probably never imagined. You have the creativity and intelligence to help me build projects that actually matter." "And what about love?" The question seemed to surprise him. "What about it? Do you think love is important in a marriage?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering the question with the same analytical approach he might apply to a business decision. "I think compatibility and mutual respect are more important than romantic feelings. Love can grow between people who work well together and share similar goals. And if it doesn't grow, then you still have a partnership based on shared interests and mutual benefit." "Riley, I'm not going to pretend this is a fairy tale romance. But I am promising you a life where you'll never have to worry about financial security, where you'll have access to opportunities that most people never get, and where you'll be part of a family that has the power to make real changes in the world." His honesty was almost refreshing after the careful euphemisms his mother had used. Marcus Sterling wasn't pretending to be in love with me or claiming that our arrangement was based on deep emotional connection. He was offering a business partnership disguised as a marriage, and he seemed to genuinely believe that was enough. "Marcus, can I ask you something about your family's business?" "Of course, my father's firm has been partnered with Sterling Development for several years now. I'm curious about how those partnerships typically work." "We provide capital and connections that allow smaller firms to take on larger projects than they could handle independently. In return, we get access to specialized expertise and local market knowledge." His tone became more animated as he shifted into what was obviously familiar territory. "It's a win-win arrangement that helps everyone grow." And firms that partner with Sterling Development, do they usually maintain their independence or do they become more integrated into your operations over time? That depends on what works best for everyone involved. Some partnerships evolve into full acquisitions if that makes business sense. Others remain independent but closely aligned. Marcus studied my face carefully. Why do you ask? I'm just trying to understand what my father's future with Sterling Development might look like. Whether Chen and Associates will remain a family business or become something different. Your father's firm has been very successful within our partnership structure. I don't see any reason why that would change, especially once our families are connected through marriage. The phrasing was telling. Marcus saw our marriage as a way to cement Sterling Development's control over my father's firm, ensuring that Chen and Associates would never be able to break free from their partnership even if they wanted to. Has Sterling Development ever had partnerships that didn't work out? Occasionally, business relationships sometimes run their course and both parties decide to pursue different directions. His answer was carefully neutral, but I caught something in his expression that suggested there was more to the story. What happens in those cases? Usually we're able to negotiate transitions that work for everyone. Though sometimes firms that leave our partnership structure find it difficult to maintain their previous level of success. The veiled threat was subtle but unmistakable. Firms that tried to leave Sterling Development's orbit faced consequences that made independence unviable. As we walked back toward the house, Marcus's phone buzzed with what appeared to be an urgent message. I'm sorry, Riley, but I need to take this call. Business crisis that requires immediate attention. Of course I understand. My assistant will be in touch this week to coordinate our engagement announcement and start planning the wedding. I'm thinking we should aim for early fall, September or October. That seems very fast. The business reasons for our marriage are somewhat time-sensitive, Marcus said with the same casual tone he might use to discuss dinner plans. And I see no reason to delay something we've both agreed is mutually beneficial. After Marcus disappeared into his home office to handle his business crisis, Catherine walked me back to my car. Her demeanor had shifted subtly, becoming more maternal and slightly more direct. Riley, I hope you understand what a fortunate position you're in, she said as we reached the driveway. Marcus could have married anyone, but he specifically requested this arrangement because he respects your intelligence and accomplishments. I appreciate that. Though I have to admit, I'm still adjusting to the idea of marriage being arranged rather than chosen. Oh my dear, all the best marriages are arranged to some degree. Even when people think they're marrying for love, there are always practical considerations involved. Family compatibility, financial security, social position, these things matter whether we acknowledge them or not. Catherine's smile was sympathetic but firm. The difference is that you're entering this marriage with your eyes open to those realities rather than being surprised by them later. And if Marcus and I discover we're not compatible, you'll learn to be compatible. That's what marriage is, a commitment to building something together regardless of temporary feelings or minor disagreements. Catherine's tone suggested she was sharing wisdom from personal experience. Riley, I want you to understand something important. The Sterling family takes care of our own. Once you're part of this family, you'll never have to worry about your security or your future. But that protection comes with expectations. What kind of expectations? Loyalty, discretion. Understanding that the family's reputation and interests come before individual preferences. Her voice remained warm, but there was steel underneath. The Sterling name carries weight in this state, and that weight comes with responsibilities. I understand, I hope you do. Because once you're committed to this path, turning back becomes very difficult for everyone involved. The warning was delivered with a smile, but its meaning was crystal clear. Once I married Marcus Sterling, I would belong to his family in ways that would make escape nearly impossible. As I drove away from the Sterling estate, I felt like I was carrying valuable intelligence back from enemy territory. The afternoon had confirmed everything I'd suspected about the family's controlling nature and their expectations for women. But it had also revealed something I hadn't expected, a sense that the Sterling family was operating under pressures I didn't fully understand. Marcus's reference to time-sensitive business reasons for our marriage suggested that Sterling Development needed the Chen family alliance to proceed quickly. Catherine's emphasis on loyalty and discretion implied that the family was concerned about threats to their reputation. And most telling, Marcus's careful responses to my questions about failed partnerships indicated that Sterling Development had vulnerabilities they were working hard to hide.
I called Alex as soon as I reached my apartment back in Portland. "How did it go?" he asked, without preamble. "Better than I expected from an intelligence gathering standpoint. Marcus Sterling is exactly what you'd expect from someone raised with unlimited money and power, but he's not stupid. And there are definitely cracks in the Sterling family facade." "What kind of cracks?" "They're in a hurry to formalize this marriage, which suggests they need the partnership with my family more than they're letting on." Catherine Sterling made several comments about family loyalty and discretion that felt like warnings. And Marcus was evasive when I asked about partnerships that hadn't worked out. "Did you get any access to information about their current financial situation?" "Not directly, but Marcus got called away for what he described as a business crisis. And the whole conversation about my future role felt like they're planning to use the marriage to ensure permanent control over my father's firm." Alex was quiet for a moment. "Riley, are you sure you want to go through with this? The more we learn about the Sterling family, the more dangerous this plan seems." "I'm sure, Alex, if I don't do this, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering if I could have found a way to free my family without sacrificing my future. And if I do this, at least I'll know I tried everything possible." "What's the next step?" "I need to get closer to their business operations." Marcus mentioned that his assistant would be contacting me about engagement planning and wedding arrangements. That's my opportunity to spend more time around the Sterling family and hopefully gain access to information about their current problems. "And how long do you think you can maintain this deception?" "As long as it takes." Marcus is planning on a fall wedding, which gives me maybe 3 months to find what I need and figure out how to use it. 3 months of pretending to be in love with someone you can't stand, surrounded by people who will destroy you if they discover what you're really doing. 3 months of fighting for my freedom and my family's future instead of just accepting defeat. After we hung up, I spent the evening reviewing everything I'd learned during my visit to the Sterling estate. The family was clearly powerful and well-connected, but they were also operating under constraints and pressures that created potential leverage points. The key would be figuring out exactly what those pressures were and how I could use them to create a negotiating position strong enough to secure my family's freedom. It would require careful planning, considerable risk-taking, and probably some luck. But for the first time since my parents had handed me those divorce papers, I felt like I had a real chance of winning. The Sterling development offices occupied 3 floors of a glass tower in downtown Hartford, all polished marble and understated luxury that spoke of serious money and serious power. I walked through the lobby on a Tuesday morning in July, wearing my most professional outfit and carrying a leather portfolio that contained my engagement planning notes. To anyone watching, I looked like a young woman excited about planning her wedding to one of Connecticut's most eligible bachelors. In reality, I was conducting reconnaissance on one of the state's most powerful development companies. Marcus's assistant, Diana Walsh, met me in the executive reception area with the kind of polished smile that came from years of managing high-maintenance clients and demanding bosses. She was probably in her 40s, impeccably dressed, with the air of someone who knew where all the bodies were buried and was trusted to keep that information secure. "Riley, so wonderful to see you again," Diana said, though we'd only met briefly at a Sterling family dinner the week before. "Marcus is finishing up a conference call, but he asked me to show you around and discuss some of the wedding planning details." "That sounds perfect. I'm excited to see where Marcus works." Diana led me through corridors lined with architectural renderings and photographs of Sterling development projects. The displays were clearly designed to impress visitors, showcasing luxury hotels, upscale residential developments, and commercial complexes that represented hundreds of millions of dollars in completed construction. The Sterling family has been developing properties in Connecticut for over 40 years. Diana explained as we walked. Mr. Sterling Sr. started with small residential projects and gradually expanded into commercial and hospitality development. It's impressive how much they've accomplished. Marcus mentioned that Sterling Development works with quite a few partner firms. "Oh yes, we have relationships with dozens of architectural firms, construction companies, and specialty contractors throughout the region. The Sterling approach has always been to build long-term partnerships, rather than just project-by-project relationships. That must create a lot of stability for the partner firms." "Absolutely, though of course the development business can be unpredictable. Market conditions, regulatory changes, financing challenges, there are always factors that can affect project timelines and profitability." Diana's tone was carefully neutral, but I caught something in her expression that suggested she was thinking about specific challenges rather than speaking hypothetically. Has Sterling Development been affected by recent market changes? Every development company faces headwinds from time to time. The key is having strong partnerships and diversified project portfolios to weather temporary difficulties. The careful non-answer told me that Sterling Development was indeed facing problems, but Diana was too professional to discuss them with someone outside the immediate family. We continued the tour, with Diana pointing out conference rooms where major deals had been negotiated, and offices where senior staff managed various aspects of the company's operations. Everything looked successful and prosperous, but I noticed small details that suggested potential stress. Several offices that should have been occupied were empty. The receptionist's desk was covered with past due notices that had been quickly shuffled under other papers when we approached. And most telling, a whiteboard in one conference room showed a project timeline with multiple delays and budget overruns marked in red ink. The Greenwich Hotel project has been quite a challenge, Diana said when she noticed me looking at the whiteboard. Environmental issues that weren't anticipated in the initial planning phase. What kind of environmental issues? Soil contamination that turned out to be more extensive than the preliminary assessments indicated. It's required additional remediation work that has delayed the opening and significantly increased costs. That must be frustrating for everyone involved. It's been a learning experience, though it's also created some cash flow challenges that have required creative financing solutions. The admission was more than Diana had probably intended to share, but it confirmed what Alex and I had suspected about Sterling Development's financial situation. The Greenwich Hotel project wasn't just delayed, it was bleeding money in ways that were straining the company's resources. Diana, may I ask you something confidential? Of course, as someone who's going to be part of the Sterling family, I'm curious about the company's long-term stability. Are there any concerns I should be aware of? Diana glanced around to make sure we weren't being overheard, then moved closer. Riley, I've worked for this family for 12 years, and I've never seen Mr. Sterling or Marcus as stressed as they've been recently. The Greenwich project problems are just the tip of the iceberg. What do you mean? There are 3 other major projects that are facing similar issues. Cost overruns, regulatory delays, financing complications. The company has expanded very aggressively over the past 5 years, and now several of those investments are proving more problematic than anyone anticipated. How serious are the problems? Serious enough that the family has been exploring options for bringing in additional investors or restructuring some of their debt obligations. The partnership arrangements with firms like your father's company have become much more important to Sterling's overall financial strategy. The conversation was interrupted by Marcus appearing in the corridor, looking harried in a way I'd never seen before. His usual confident demeanor was strained, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. Riley, sorry to keep you waiting. Crisis management seems to be a full-time job lately. His smile was forced, lacking the easy charm he'd displayed during our previous meetings. No problem at all. Diana has been giving me a wonderful tour of the offices. Excellent. Diana, could you pull together those vendor proposals for the catering selection? Riley and I need to make some decisions about the reception planning. As Diana bustled away to gather wedding planning materials, Marcus led me to his private office. The space was elegant but lived in, with architectural drawings scattered across his desk and multiple computer monitors, displaying what appeared to be financial spreadsheets and project timelines. I have to apologize for the chaos, Marcus said, quickly minimizing the spreadsheets on his screens. We're in the middle of negotiating some complex deals that require constant attention. It looks like you're managing quite a few projects simultaneously. That's the nature of development work. Multiple projects in various stages of planning, construction, and completion. Marcus's tone was casual, but his movements were tense as he organized papers on his desk. Though I have to admit, some of our current projects have been more challenging than usual. Diana mentioned something about environmental issues with the Greenwich Hotel.
Marcus's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Environmental remediation is always a risk in development work. We budget for contingencies, but sometimes the actual scope of work exceeds initial projections. How much can that affect a project's profitability? Significantly, if the problems are extensive enough. Environmental cleanup can add millions to a project's cost and months to its timeline. Marcus moved to close his office door, then returned to his desk with an expression that suggested he was about to share something confidential. Riley, I want to be honest with you about something. Sterling Development is facing some temporary financial pressures related to our current project portfolio. What kind of pressures? Cash flow challenges primarily. We have several major projects that are requiring more capital than originally budgeted, while revenue from completed projects has been delayed due to market conditions. It's not uncommon in the development business, but it does require careful management. And how does that affect our wedding plans? It doesn't necessarily, but it does mean that the timeline for our marriage has become somewhat more important from a business perspective. The partnership arrangements between Sterling Development and our partner firms are secured by family relationships as well as contractual obligations. The admission was more direct than I had expected. Marcus was essentially confirming that my marriage to him was being used as collateral for his family's business relationships. Marcus, are you saying that Sterling Development's financial stability depends on our marriage proceeding as scheduled? I'm saying that family alliances provide stability and security that purely contractual relationships sometimes lack. When families are connected through marriage, business partnerships become much more reliable and long-term. And if our marriage were delayed or canceled? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying my face carefully. Riley, why are you asking these questions? Are you having second thoughts about our arrangement? I'm not having second thoughts, but I am trying to understand what I'm becoming part of. If Sterling Development is facing financial difficulties, I want to know what that means for our future together. It means that your family's partnership with Sterling Development becomes even more valuable, and our marriage ensures that partnership remains strong regardless of temporary market fluctuations. But what if the financial difficulties aren't temporary? What if Sterling Development's problems are more serious than you're letting on? Marcus's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. What makes you think our problems might be more serious than I've indicated? Because Diana seemed genuinely worried when she talked about the company's recent challenges. And because you look like you haven't slept in weeks. Diana talks too much sometimes, and yes, I've been working long hours to address some complex issues. But that's what leadership requires during challenging periods. Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. What is Sterling Development in danger of bankruptcy or financial collapse? The question hung in the air between us like a live wire. Marcus stared at me for what felt like an eternity, his expression cycling through surprise, calculation, and something that might have been fear. Where would you get an idea like that? He asked finally. From adding up the pieces. Multiple projects with serious cost overruns. Cash flow problems. The urgent need to secure family alliances. Marcus, if I'm going to marry you, I deserve to know what I'm walking into. You're walking into a marriage with a man who has the resources and determination to solve temporary business challenges. Yes, Sterling Development is facing some difficulties, but they're manageable with the right strategy and partnerships. What happens if they're not manageable? They will be. But what if they're not? Marcus stood up abruptly, moving to the window that overlooked downtown Hartford. When he spoke again, his voice carried a strain I'd never heard before. If Sterling Development were to fail, it would take down a lot of other businesses with it. Your father's firm, for example, along with dozens of other partner companies that depend on our projects and financing. The ripple effects would destroy hundreds of jobs and millions of dollars in investments. So my marriage to you is essentially insurance against that outcome. Your marriage to me is the foundation of a partnership that benefits everyone involved. Riley, I'm not going to lie to you. Sterling Development is in a precarious position right now. But that makes our family alliance even more important, not less important. And if I were to break our engagement, then Sterling Development would have to explore other options for securing our financial stability. Options that might not be as favorable to your family's interests. The threat was delivered calmly, but its implications were crystal clear. If I backed out of the marriage, Sterling Development would likely sever their partnership with my father's firm in ways that would be financially devastating. Marcus, I need some time to process all of this. Time is something we don't have a lot of. The board of directors is meeting next week to review our financial position and make decisions about future partnerships. Your engagement announcement needs to happen before that meeting. Why? Because formal family connections provide confidence to investors and partners. An engaged couple represents stability and commitment that business contracts alone can't guarantee. I realized that I was being given a window into the desperate calculations that drove Sterling Development's decision-making. My marriage wasn't just convenient, it was essential to their survival strategy. What if I could find another solution? Another way for Sterling Development to address their financial problems without requiring me to sacrifice my autonomy. What kind of solution? I don't know yet. But Marcus, if there was a way to save your family's business without forcing me into a marriage I don't want, wouldn't that be better for everyone? Marcus turned from the window to face me directly. Riley, what aren't you telling me? This conversation feels like more than pre-wedding anxiety. The moment had arrived where I had to choose between maintaining my deception and taking the enormous risk of revealing my true intentions. Everything I'd learned about Sterling Development's vulnerabilities would be useless if I couldn't find a way to apply pressure at exactly the right moment. Marcus, what if I told you that I've been investigating Sterling Development's business practices? And what if I told you that I've found evidence of problems that could trigger government investigations and destroy your family's reputation permanently? The silence that followed was electric with tension. Marcus stared at me as if I'd suddenly revealed myself to be a completely different person, which in many ways I had. What are you talking about? He asked quietly. I'm talking about environmental violations, safety code violations, and financial irregularities that could cost Sterling Development hundreds of millions of dollars if they became public. I'm talking about evidence that could destroy your family's business permanently. You're bluffing. The Greenwich Hotel project wasn't just delayed by unexpected soil contamination, it was delayed because Sterling Development knew about the contamination before they broke ground and chose to proceed anyway, hoping they could cover up the problem. The environmental impact assessment you filed with the city was deliberately falsified. Marcus's face went white. How could you possibly know that? Because I've seen the original soil analysis reports that your company buried. And I've seen the emails between your project managers discussing how to minimize the contamination disclosure to avoid regulatory delays. That's impossible. Those documents are confidential and secured. Diana talks too much, remember. Especially when she's worried about legal liability and thinks she's confiding in a future family member who can be trusted with sensitive information. The truth was that Diana hadn't directly provided the documents, but she had given me enough specific details about the project's problems that Alex's uncle James had been able to request the right public records and identify the discrepancies between Sterling's public statements and the actual environmental data. What do you want? Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I want my family released from their partnership obligations with Sterling Development. I want all debts forgiven and all contractual relationships terminated. And I want a written guarantee that Sterling Development will never retaliate against Chen and Associates or attempt to damage my father's business in any way. And in exchange, I'll keep the information about Sterling Development's environmental violations confidential. No government agencies, no journalists, no public exposure of your family's business practices. Marcus sank into his desk chair, looking like a man who had just realized he was trapped in a cage that was rapidly closing around him. Riley, you don't understand what you're asking for. If Sterling Development loses the Chen and Associates partnership and other similar arrangements, we won't be able to maintain our current project commitments. The company could collapse entirely. That's not my problem. You created this situation by expanding beyond your means and using deceptive practices to hide problems from investors and regulators. I'm offering you a way to avoid criminal prosecution and public disgrace, but I'm not offering to save your business at the expense of my freedom. What about your family? If Sterling Development fails, the economic impact will affect dozens of firms and hundreds of workers. Are you prepared to be responsible for that? I'm prepared to be responsible for exposing a company that has built its success on deception and manipulation. If that causes economic disruption, blame the people who created the unsustainable situation, not the person who refused to be victimized by it. Marcus was quiet for several minutes, staring at his computer screens where the financial spreadsheets told the story of his family's mounting problems. When he finally looked up, his expression had changed from shock to something that might have been respect. How long have you been planning this? Since the day my parents handed me divorce papers at my graduation and told me I was being sold to pay their debts. And the whole time you've been pretending to go along with the engagement, you've been gathering evidence against my family.
I've been fighting for my right to choose my own future instead of accepting that I'm a commodity to be traded between powerful families. Riley, what you're proposing is essentially blackmail. What I'm proposing is accountability. If Sterling Development's business practices can't survive public scrutiny, then maybe they don't deserve to survive at all. Marcus stood up and walked to a filing cabinet, withdrawing a thick folder that he placed on his desk. These are the partnership agreements between Sterling Development and your father's firm. If I were to agree to terminate these contracts and forgive the associated debts, Sterling Development would lose approximately $15 million in projected revenue and ongoing obligations. That sounds like a bargain compared to the cost of federal environmental investigations and criminal fraud charges. And you're certain you have enough evidence to trigger those investigations? I'm certain I have enough evidence to destroy your family's reputation and business permanently. Whether I use that evidence depends entirely on how you respond to my proposal. Marcus opened the folder and began reviewing documents, occasionally making notes in the margins. After 20 minutes of tense silence, he looked up with an expression of grim resignation. I'll need to discuss this with my father and our attorneys. But Riley, if we agree to your terms, I want some guarantees from you as well. What kind of guarantees? I want a written agreement that you'll never disclose the information you've gathered about Sterling Development's business practices. I want assurance that you won't use this same approach to target other companies or individuals. And I want your word that once this arrangement is finalized, you'll disappear from our lives permanently. You have my word on all of those conditions with one addition. What addition? If Sterling Development ever attempts to retaliate against me, my family, or Alex Thompson in any way, all agreements are void and I'll immediately release everything I know to federal investigators and journalists. Fair enough. Marcus picked up his phone and dialed a number. Dad, I need you to come to my office immediately. We have a situation that requires family discussion. While we waited for Robert Sterling to arrive, Marcus and I sat in silence that felt charged with the electricity of a fundamental power shift. For months, the Sterling family had held all the leverage in their relationship with my family, using debt and dependency to control our choices and futures. Now, in the space of a single conversation, that leverage had been completely reversed. Robert Sterling arrived within 10 minutes, looking like an older version of his son, but with the additional gravitas that came from decades of wielding power and influence. His expression was carefully controlled, but I could see the tension in his posture as Marcus briefly explained the situation. Miss Chen, Robert said when Marcus finished, you've put us in a very difficult position. You put yourselves in a difficult position when you decided to build your business on deception and manipulation. I'm offering you a way out. What you're offering is extortion. What I'm offering is a business transaction. You release my family from obligations they should never have been forced to accept, and I protect your family from consequences you richly deserve. Robert Sterling studied me with the calculating gaze of a man who had spent his career evaluating opponents and opportunities. You're quite remarkable, Miss Chen. Most people in your position would have simply accepted the arrangement and moved on with their lives. Most people in my position don't have access to information that could destroy your family's business. And how did you gain access to that information? Through research, investigation, and the assistance of people who believe that truth and accountability matter more than protecting powerful families from the consequences of their actions. Robert was quiet for a moment, then moved to his son's desk and began reviewing the partnership documents Marcus had withdrawn. If we were to agree to your terms, Sterling Development would face significant financial challenges. Less significant than the challenges you'd face if federal agencies began investigating your environmental violations and business practices. But Miss Chen, you should understand that releasing dozens of partner firms from their obligations simultaneously would likely force Sterling Development into bankruptcy regardless of whether criminal charges are filed. That's a risk you'll have to evaluate for yourselves. Robert and Marcus exchanged glances that spoke of rapid calculations and desperate options. After several minutes of whispered conversation, Robert turned back to me with an expression of resigned acceptance. Miss Chen, we'll agree to release Chen and Associates from all partnership obligations and associated debts. But we can only afford to do this for your family's firm. The other partnerships will have to remain in place. That's acceptable. We'll also agree to provide a written guarantee against retaliation, and we'll expect similar guarantees from you regarding confidentiality. Understood. The paperwork will take several days to prepare.
How do we handle the engagement announcement and wedding planning in the meantime? We don't. As of today, our engagement is canceled. I'll handle explanations to my family and to anyone else who needs to know. Marcus looked almost relieved. Riley, for what it's worth, I think you would have made a formidable addition to the Sterling family. And for what it's worth, I think you would have made a decent husband if you'd been willing to let me remain myself instead of trying to turn me into someone else. 3 days later, I sat in my parents' living room in Connecticut, watching them review the documents that officially released Chen and Associates from all obligations to Sterling Development. The papers were signed, notarized, and legally binding, representing the end of a partnership that had controlled our family's choices for over 15 years. I don't understand how this happened. My mother said for the third time. Robert Sterling called and said they were restructuring their partnerships, but he didn't explain why they were forgiving our debts. Sometimes business relationships run their course, I said, echoing the phrase Marcus had used weeks earlier. Sterling Development decided to focus on different types of partnerships going forward, and Marcus was comfortable with canceling your engagement. Marcus and I both realized that we weren't as compatible as we'd initially hoped. It was a mutual decision. My father looked up from the legal documents with an expression of bewildered relief. Riley, I need you to know that we never intended for you to feel forced into this arrangement. We thought we were securing your future, not limiting your choices. I know, Dad, and I understand that you were trying to protect our family's security. But there had to be a better way than selling me to pay your debts. We weren't selling you, my mother protested. We were arranging a beneficial marriage that would have provided you with opportunities and security. You were arranging a marriage that would have cost me my autonomy, my career, and my right to choose my own partner. The fact that Marcus Sterling has money doesn't change what you were asking me to sacrifice. The conversation was difficult but necessary. My parents were gradually coming to understand that their arrangement with Sterling Development had been more controlling and manipulative than they'd realized, and that my refusal to accept it hadn't been selfish rebellion but legitimate self-defense. What happens now? My father asked. Now Chen and Associates operates independently. You'll have to work harder to secure new clients and projects, but you'll also have complete control over your business decisions and your family's future. And what about you? What are your plans? I'm moving to Austin, Texas. Morrison and Associates offered me a position designing sustainable, affordable housing projects, and I've decided to accept it. Austin is very far away, my mother said quietly. Far enough for me to build my own life without worrying about whether my choices are acceptable to people who think they have the right to control my future. The words were harsh, but they were also true. Moving to Austin would give me the geographic and emotional distance I needed to build a career and relationships based on my own values and decisions. 6 months later, I was designing community housing projects in East Austin and living in a small apartment that I'd chosen and furnished myself. The work was challenging and meaningful, involving collaborations with community organizations and local government agencies to create affordable housing that was both functional and beautiful. Alex had taken a position with an environmental consulting firm in Houston, close enough that we could see each other regularly, but far enough that we each had space to build our individual careers. Our relationship had deepened and matured through the experience of fighting for our right to be together, but we were taking our time with decisions about marriage and long-term commitments. No rush, Alex had said during one of our weekend visits. We've got plenty of time to figure out what we want our future to look like, and nobody is going to arrange it for us but ourselves. Professor Rodriguez visited Austin in the spring to deliver a lecture on sustainable design, and we met for dinner to catch up on developments in both our lives. I have to tell you, Riley, what you accomplished with the Sterling family was extraordinary. Most people in your situation would have either accepted the arrangement or simply refused it and faced the consequences. Finding a third option that protected both your autonomy and your family's security took remarkable strategic thinking. It also took a lot of help from people who believed I had the right to choose my own path. And what did you learn from the experience? I learned that power isn't always what it appears to be. The Sterling family seemed invincible because of their wealth and connections, but they were actually vulnerable because their success was built on deception. I learned that sometimes the best way to fight people who are trying to control you is to gather information and use it strategically. And what advice would you give to other young people facing similar pressures? That no one has the right to sell your future to pay for their mistakes. Family loyalty doesn't require you to sacrifice your autonomy, and financial security isn't worth giving up your right to make your own choices. And most importantly, there's almost always a third option between submission and destruction. You just have to be willing to fight creatively to find it. Professor Rodriguez smiled. Those are lessons that will serve you well in architecture and in life. I hope so. Though I also hope I never have to use them in quite the same way again. From what I can see, you're building exactly the kind of life and career you fought for. Independent, meaningful, and entirely your own. As I walked back to my apartment that evening, I thought about the journey that had brought me from a college graduation that should have been a celebration to a life that was genuinely my own. The experience had been terrifying, exhausting, and sometimes morally complicated, but it had also taught me that I was capable of protecting myself and the people I cared about in ways I'd never imagined. The Sterling family had recovered from their financial difficulties, though not without significant changes to their business model and operations. Marcus had married someone else, a society woman whose family's connections provided the stability Sterling development needed without the complications I had introduced. My parents had rebuilt Chen and Associates into a smaller but more sustainable firm that specialized in residential and small commercial projects. And I had learned that sometimes the most important battles are the ones you fight for the right to become who you're meant to be, regardless of other people's expectations or demands. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.